We think of night as one long stretch of rest, but in medieval England, it was something far stranger. Tonight, step into the candlelit chambers and creaking cottages of the Middle Ages, where people didn't sleep like we do today. Divided slumber, midnight prayers, shadowy tasks between first and second sleep, these strange habits weren't just normal, they were expected, and you'll soon see why the quietest hours weren't so quiet after all. If softly told glimpses into forgotten lives bring calm to your night, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to keep unraveling the geek sleep patterns, superstitions, and nighttime mysteries of the past, one peaceful story at a time. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. You are Margaret of Shepford, and it is the year 1387, though such precise dating matters little to you as you kneel beside your small cottage's dying fire, carefully placing one more stick of precious wood onto the glowing embers. The sun disappeared behind the oak trees 2 hours ago, and already the familiar rhythm of your medieval life is pulling you toward what your neighbors call the firste sleep. Your husband, William, has already secured the wooden door with its simple iron latch, checking twice that the leather hinges hold firm against the frame. In this world, where artificial light comes only from rushes dipped in sheep fat or the occasional expensive candle, darkness is not merely the absence of light, it is a different country altogether, with its own customs, dangers, and routines. Your cottage, like every peasant dwelling in your village, consists of a single room measuring perhaps 20 feet by 15 feet. The earthen floor has been swept clean and scattered with fresh rushes that crackle softly under your bare feet. The walls made of wattle and daub, that ancient technique of weaving thin wooden strips and covering them with a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung, keep out most of the October wind, though you can feel cool drafts seeping through gaps where the daub has cracked during the dry summer months. Above your head, the thatched roof rustles quietly, and you know that somewhere in that thick covering of wheat straw, field mice are making their own preparations for the night. Your husband, William, a villain bound to Lord Geoffrey's manor, has already begun the evening ritual that medievalists.net tells us was common throughout medieval England. He sits heavily on the wooden chest that contains your few precious possessions, a second woolen tunic, a bone comb, and the small leather pouch holding the 3 silver pennies you have managed to save from selling eggs at market. His day began before dawn, when he rose for his second sleep and immediately went to tend Lord Geoffrey's fields. 12 hours of harvesting barley under the weak October sun has left him exhausted, but not so tired that he forgets to check the simple wooden bar across your door one final time. "Margaret," he says quietly, his voice carrying that particular weariness you have learned to recognize over your 8 years of marriage. "Did you put out the light for Thomas?" Thomas is your youngest son, barely 3 years old, who has finally stopped the restless whimpering that has marked his evening hours since he began cutting his back teeth. Your older children, Mary and John, already lie on their straw-filled pallets near the far wall, their breathing settled into the deeper rhythms that tell you they have successfully navigated the first hour of twilight sleep. The rushlight holder, a simple iron pincer designed to grip the sheep fat-soaked rush stems that provide your only artificial illumination, sits empty now on the roughly hewn table William built when you first married. You have learned to time your evening activities around the burning rate of these rushlights, each one providing roughly an hour of dim, flickering light before guttering out in a small pool of cooled fat. BBC Future documents that peasant families, like yours, rarely used more than 1 or 2 rushlights per evening, reserving them only for essential tasks after sunset. Tonight, like every night, you have timed your final preparations to coincide with the natural rhythm that governs your medieval world. As the last pale light faded from the single oiled parchment window, a luxury that marks your family as slightly more prosperous than your neighbors who make do with wooden shutters, you completed the evening tasks that keep your household safe and functional. The chickens have been secured in their small coop behind the cottage, safe from foxes and thieves. The single pig that represents months of careful feeding and your family's hope for winter survival has been checked one final time, its pen secured. With wooden stakes driven deep into the earth, your daily routine, like that of peasants throughout medieval England, revolves entirely around the availability of natural light. History. For kids explains that agricultural work began at sunrise and ended at sunset with only brief interruptions for meals and rest. During these October days, that means nearly 11 hours of continuous labor for William, while you have spent your daylight hours tending your small garden plot, spinning wool on your drop spindle, mending clothing, and supervising the children's attempts to gather acorns and hazelnuts for winter storage. But now, as full darkness settles over Shepford village, you enter what medieval people understood as an entirely different phase of existence. This is not simply the end of the working day. It is the beginning of the night watch, a time when the familiar daytime world transforms into something requiring different skills, different awareness, and different rituals of survival. You have learned, through years of practice, to distinguish between the settling sounds of your cottage and the noises that might signal danger. The soft scurrying in the thatch above could be mice, or it could be rats, larger, more aggressive creatures that might gnaw through your carefully hoarded grain stores. The creaking of the wooden doorframe might indicate nothing more than the cooling night air causing the timber to contract, or it might suggest someone testing the strength of your simple latch. Quora discussions from medieval historians confirm that peasant families like yours had few options for home security beyond simple wooden bars and the watchful presence of neighbors. Your bed, if such a grand term can be applied to your sleeping arrangements, consists of a wooden frame barely large enough for you and William, filled with a straw-stuffed mattress that requires restuffing every few months as the straw compresses and begins to mold. Yet 50 details how peasant bedding differed dramatically from noble accommodations, where wealthy households enjoyed feather-filled mattresses and silk-lined coverlets. Your family makes do with straw mattresses covered by woolen blankets that you wove yourself from the fleece of your lord's sheep. Tonight, as on every night, your children will sleep on their individual pallets arranged along the cottage's eastern wall. Mary, at 7 years old, has earned the position closest to the wall, the safest and warmest spot according to the hierarchical sleeping arrangements that BBC Future identifies as universal throughout medieval Europe. John, 5 years old, sleeps in the middle position while little Thomas occupies the outer edge where you can reach him quickly if he wakes crying in the night. The physical act of settling into your bed requires its own careful ritual. You and William remove only your outer tunics, keeping your linen undergarments and woolen leg wrappings in place. The night air, even in October, carries enough chill to make completely undressing an invitation to dangerous cold. Medieval medical texts, as noted by medievalists.net, recommended sleeping on one's right side during the first sleep to aid digestion, then turning to the left side during the second sleep for better rest. As you arrange the woolen blanket over yourself and William, you can hear the sounds that mark the beginning of Shepford's communal night watch. From the cottage nearest yours comes the low murmur of your neighbour Edmund discussing something with his wife, probably the morning's plan for harvesting the last of their barley before the expected rain. 2 houses down, you can hear the crying of baby Alice, barely 2 months old, whose mother Joan will spend much of the night in the wakeful period between first and second sleep, nursing and comforting her infant. But it is the absence of certain sounds that truly marks the arrival of medieval night. Gone are the daytime noises of livestock being driven to pasture, the rhythmic threshing of grain, the creaking of cart wheels on the village's single dirt road. Gone too are the calling voices of children, the barking of working dogs, the general bustle of a community engaged in agricultural survival. In their place comes a quieter soundscape, the rustling of nocturnal animals, the distant call of a barn owl, the soft whisper of wind through the grain fields that surround your village. You know that in Lord Geoffrey's manor house, barely half a mile away, a very different kind of night watch has begun. There, servants will maintain oil lamps and candles through much of the dark hours, and armed men will patrol the manor's perimeter. But here in the village, security depends on simpler measures: barred doors, alert neighbours, and the unspoken understanding that any unusual sound in the night will bring the entire community to wakefulness. As your breathing begins to slow and your body settles into the first sleep, your mind cannot quite release its vigilant awareness of the night sounds around your cottage. This divided attention, part of you sinking toward unconsciousness, part maintaining watchful alertness, represents one of the fundamental skills that every medieval peasant must master to survive the vulnerable hours of darkness. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you know that in approximately 3 hours you will wake naturally, as if summoned by some internal clock, ready to begin the mysterious middle watch that divides the medieval night into 2 distinct periods of rest. What will happen during those wakeful hours between your first and second sleep remains, for now, a question that hovers at the edges of your consciousness as the familiar weight of medieval fatigue pulls you down into the temporary oblivion that begins every peasant's night watch. The sound that wakes you is not unexpected. It never is during these October nights when your body has adjusted to the ancient rhythm that Roger E. Kirch's research has documented as universal among pre-industrial populations. Somewhere in the deeper recesses of your mind, an internal timekeeper has been counting the hours since you first closed your eyes, and now, approximately 3 hours later, it draws you back to consciousness with the gentle insistence of a church bell. William stirs beside you, his breathing changing from the deep, slow rhythm of first sleep to the lighter pattern that signals his return to wakefulness. This is the time that medieval people called the watch, that mysterious period between first and second sleep when the night belongs neither to day nor to true darkness, but to something entirely its own. Outside your cottage, you can hear other signs that Shepford village is experiencing its collective awakening. The soft murmur of voices from Edmund's house, the gentle creak of someone's door opening, the quiet footsteps of a neighbour checking on livestock or attending to personal needs. William sits up carefully, trying not to disturb the straw mattress more than necessary. The night air that seemed merely cool when you first went to bed now carries a sharper edge that warns of the coming winter. He reaches for the leather water bucket that sits beside your bed, taking a careful drink before offering it to you. The water tastes of the iron tang that comes from your village well, drawn just after sunset when the day's work was finally complete. "Listen," William whispers, and you both freeze in the darkness. For a moment, You hear nothing unusual, just the familiar sounds of a medieval night. But then it comes again, the soft, scraping sound of something moving along the outer wall of your cottage. William's hand moves instinctively to the heavy wooden staff he keeps beside the bed, while you strain your ears to identify the source of the disturbance. Medieval nights, you have learned over your years as a peasant wife, are filled with such moments of uncertainty. Historical sources document that peasant households like yours face constant low-level security threats: thieves seeking stored grain, poachers hunting in Lord Geoffrey's woods, vagrants and masterless men searching for shelter or easy targets. Your cottage, with its simple wooden latch and daub walls, offers little protection beyond concealment and the hope that more tempting targets lie elsewhere. The scraping sound continues for several more seconds, then stops. William remains motionless, listening while you mentally catalogue the possible explanations. It could be a pig that has broken free from its pen, rooting along your walls for fallen grain. It could be a large dog, perhaps one of the manor's hunting hounds that has wandered into the village. But it could also be a person, someone testing the strength of your walls, looking for a loose section of daub that might provide access to your small stores of food and possessions. After several minutes of silence, William finally relaxes. "Likely just a pig," he murmurs, but you notice he keeps the staff within easy reach. This kind of interrupted vigilance, you realize, is simply part of the medieval night experience. Unlike the deep, unbroken sleep that modern people consider normal, your medieval rest is punctuated by periods of awareness, evaluation, and decision-making. With the immediate concern addressed, you and William settle into the quiet activities that BBC Future identifies as typical of the medieval watch period. William reaches under the bed for the small bundle of rushes you prepared earlier in the evening. Long stems of soft rush plants that you gathered from the marshy ground near the village mill, carefully peeled to expose the pithy core, then dipped in mutton fat to create your household's primary source of artificial light. The process of lighting a rush requires careful attention. William takes his fire steel, a curved piece of iron that represents one of your household's most valuable possessions, and strikes it against a piece of flint, directing the sparks toward a small pile of tinder made from charred linen. Medieval lighting techniques required considerable skill. You cannot simply flip a switch or strike a modern match. Instead, you must coax fire from stone and steel, nursing tiny sparks into flames capable of igniting your rush lights. The first spark catches, and William carefully blows on the smouldering tinder until a small flame appears. He touches this flame to the fat-soaked tip of a rush, and suddenly your cottage is filled with the warm, flickering light that transforms the space from mysterious darkness into familiar domesticity. The flame burns with a steady but dim illumination, roughly equivalent to a single candle, casting dancing shadows on the daub walls and revealing the quiet scene of your children, still deep in their first sleep. By this gentle light, you begin the activities that make the medieval watch period both necessary and productive. From beneath your side of the bed, you retrieve your drop spindle and a small bundle of prepared wool, the long fibers already combed and ready for spinning into thread. This work, which occupies much of your daylight hours during the agricultural off-season, can continue during the night watch, providing both useful productivity and the kind of repetitive, meditative activity that helps pass the wakeful hours. The motion of drop spinning, holding the fiber in your left hand while using your right to set the weighted spindle turning, drawing out the wool into an ever-lengthening thread, requires just enough concentration to keep your mind occupied, without demanding the full attention that might prevent you from listening for unusual sounds outside your cottage. As you work, the thread grows longer, wrapping around the spindle shaft in the careful pattern that will eventually become part of a new tunic for John, whose current clothing shows the wear and stains that mark a 5-year-old's active life. William, meanwhile, has taken out his eating knife and a small piece of wood, beginning the careful work of shaping a new handle for your butter churn. The old handle, made from ash wood and smoothed by months of use, finally cracked last week when Mary tried to help with the churning and applied too much force to the mechanism. Replacing such household items requires time and patience, qualities that the night watch provides in abundance. As you work by rushlight, you become aware of other activities taking place throughout Shepford village. From the direction of the miller's house comes the faint sound of someone grinding grain, probably preparing flour for tomorrow's bread baking. 2 houses away, you can hear the low murmur of voices engaged in quiet conversation, punctuated by occasional soft laughter. Near the village's single well, someone is drawing water, the rope and bucket creating their familiar sequence of squeaks and splashes. These sounds create a comforting sense of community even in the isolation of your individual cottage. Medieval. Historians note that the night watch period often became a time for social connection, particularly among family members who had little opportunity for quiet conversation during the demanding daylight hours of agricultural work. "The barley looked good today," William says softly, his knife moving in slow, careful strokes along the wood grain. Lord Geoffrey should be pleased with the harvest. This seemingly simple observation carries layers of meaning that reflect the complex realities of peasant life. A good harvest means that your family will have enough grain to survive the winter, but it also means that Lord Geoffrey will extract his full share of the crop as part of the feudal obligations that bind William to the manor. A poor harvest might mean hunger, but it could also result in reduced demands from the lord, a dangerous gamble that no peasant family willingly courts. You find yourself thinking about the approaching winter and the preparations that still need to be completed before the first hard frost. The pig needs fattening for slaughter in November, when the cold weather will allow you to preserve the meat properly. The small garden plot behind your cottage still contains cabbages and turnips that must be harvested and stored in the root cellar William dug last spring. Your woolen cloaks need mending where the brambles tore them during blackberry gathering, and the roof thatch requires attention where you noticed a thin spot that might leak during winter rains. These mental lists and plans represent another function of the medieval night watch, the quiet time when minds can process the day's events and prepare for tomorrow's challenges. Unlike the reactive busyness of daylight hours, the watch period allows for reflection, planning, and the kind of careful thought that agricultural survival requires. As you continue spinning, your fingers working automatically through the familiar motions, you notice that little Thomas has begun to stir on his pallet. His breathing has changed, and he makes the small whimpering sounds that often signal his own transition from first sleep to the lighter rest that allows medieval children to wake if they need attention. You set down your spindle and move quietly to his side, kneeling on the rush-covered floor to check whether he needs anything. Thomas's small body is warm under his woolen blanket, and when you touch his forehead gently, he opens his eyes without surprise or distress. Medieval children, you have observed, seem to adapt to the two-sleep pattern even more easily than adults, perhaps because their natural sleep rhythms have not yet been forced into artificial patterns by work demands or social expectations. "Mama," Thomas whispers, and you can tell by his voice that he is fully awake, ready for a few minutes of gentle attention before settling back into his second sleep. You lift him carefully, carrying him to your bed where William makes room for the small, warm body between you. For the next few minutes, Thomas lies quietly, occasionally asking soft questions about tomorrow's activities or making observations about the shapes he can see in the rushlight's flickering shadows on the cottage wall. This kind of family intimacy represents yet another dimension of the medieval night watch. Historical sources document that the period between first and second sleep often became a time for physical affection, quiet conversation, and the strengthening of family bonds that might be strained by the demanding work of daylight hours. But even as you enjoy these peaceful moments with Thomas, part of your attention remains focused on the sounds and sensations that might signal danger. Medieval life requires this kind of divided awareness, particularly during the vulnerable night hours when your household's simple defenses are most easily overcome. The art of being simultaneously relaxed and vigilant represents one of the essential skills that every medieval peasant must master to survive in a world where security depends on constant attention to potential threats. As the rushlight burns lower and your internal clock signals the approach of second sleep, you find yourself wondering what the remaining hours of this medieval night will bring, and whether the sounds and activities of the watch period have prepared your household for whatever challenges tomorrow's daylight will reveal. The rushlight gutters and dies just as your internal timekeeper signals the arrival of second sleep. William carefully secures the remains of the burned rush in the iron holder, ensuring that no glowing embers remain to pose a fire threat to your straw-filled mattress or the dried rushes scattered across your earthen floor. Thomas has already drifted back into the deeper breathing that marks childhood's easy return to slumber, and you gently transfer him back to his own pallet where he settles without waking. The darkness that returns to your cottage feels different, now less mysterious, more familiar. Your eyes, adjusted to the rushlight's dim illumination, gradually accommodate to the deeper blackness, allowing you to distinguish the pale rectangle of your single window and the slightly less dark areas, where gaps in the wall admit traces of starlight. This is the darkness that medieval people knew intimately, a darkness so complete that it transforms the very nature of human consciousness and social interaction. As you settle back into your position beside William, your body begins the process of transitioning from the alert wakefulness of the watch period to the deeper rest that medieval medical texts called the morning sleep. This second period of rest, typically lasting from around 1 o'clock until sunrise, served different physiological functions than the earlier first sleep. Where first sleep appeared to be dominated by deep, restorative slumber, second sleep often included more dreams, lighter rest, and greater sensitivity to external sounds and disturbances. You have learned to use this lighter sleep period strategically, maintaining enough awareness to wake if your children need attention, while still achieving the rest necessary to sustain another day of agricultural labor. Medieval mothers, historical sources suggest, developed this kind of divided consciousness by necessity, the ability to sleep deeply enough to recover from physical exhaustion while remaining alert enough to respond to family emergencies or household threats. Tonight, as on most nights, your second sleep is punctuated by the gradual return of daytime consciousness. Your mind begins to process the tasks that await tomorrow's daylight, the completion of barley harvesting, the preparation of winter storage for root vegetables, the ongoing work of spinning wool into thread for winter clothing. These thoughts flow through your consciousness with the fluid quality that characterizes the border between sleep and waking, neither fully conscious planning nor complete unconsciousness. Somewhere in the deeper darkness before dawn, you become aware that other members of your household are also experiencing the lighter sleep of the morning hours. Mary has begun to stir on her pallet, occasionally murmuring words that suggest dreams about the village children's games or perhaps anxiety about the reading lessons that Father Benedict has recently begun offering to village children on Sunday afternoons. John's breathing has taken on the irregular rhythm that suggests his own dreams, while Thomas continues the deep, uninterrupted slumber that seems to be the privilege of the very young. From outside your cottage, the sounds of Shepford villages, collective second sleep create a subtle but perceptible soundscape. The nocturnal activities of humans blend with the natural sounds of a medieval English countryside, the distant bark of a fox, the rustle of small animals moving through grain fields, the soft lowing of cattle in Lord Geoffrey's meadows. Occasionally, you hear the measured footsteps of the night watchman making his rounds through the village. Old Peter, whose advancing age has made him unsuitable for heavy agricultural work, but whose familiarity with every cottage, path, and hiding place makes him valuable as an unofficial guardian of community security. Historical records indicate that village watchmen like Peter carried simple weapons, typically a staff or club, and served more as early warning systems than as actual defenders against serious threats. Their primary function was to notice unusual activity, raise alarms when necessary, and provide a visible deterrent to petty theft or vandalism. Peter's presence represents one of the few formal security measures available to peasant communities, supplementing the informal vigilance of individual households. As the night progresses toward dawn, you find your awareness shifting between different levels of consciousness. Sometimes you sink into what feels like deeper sleep, losing awareness of your surroundings and entering the dream states that medieval people understood as messages from God or visitations from the spiritual realm. At other times, you hover, near wakefulness, processing the sounds around your cottage and mentally reviewing the preparations necessary for the coming day. This fluctuating consciousness appears to have been the normal pattern for medieval sleep, rather than the consolidated, 8-hour periods that modern people consider standard. Recent sleep research suggests that the biphasic pattern, first sleep, watch period, second sleep, might actually be more natural for human beings than the single consolidated sleep period imposed by industrial schedules and artificial lighting. During one of your periods of lighter consciousness, you become aware that the quality of darkness outside your cottage has begun to change. The absolute blackness of deep night is giving way to the barely perceptible grayness that signals the approach of dawn. This transition happens so gradually that you cannot pinpoint the moment when it begins, but your body recognizes the shift with the instinctive awareness that connects medieval people to natural rhythms largely lost in modern times. William stirs beside you, his breathing changing to indicate his own awakening. Like you, he has learned to recognize the subtle signs that herald the end of night, the change in air temperature as the earth begins to radiate the faint warmth that precedes sunrise, the shift in sound patterns as nocturnal animals retire and diurnal creatures begin their activities, the almost imperceptible lightening of the sky that signals the approach of another day dominated by agricultural labor. "Time to wake the children," William murmurs, though he makes no immediate move to do so. These few minutes between second sleep and full wakefulness represent a brief period of transition, allowing consciousness to gradually reassemble itself for the demands of another medieval day. You lie quietly, listening to the sounds that indicate Shepford Village's collective awakening. The creak of cottage doors opening, the splash of water being drawn from the well, the soft voices of neighbors beginning their morning conversations. Your children wake with the practiced efficiency of medieval peasants accustomed to early rising. Mary sits up on her pallet and immediately begins the process of arranging her clothing and smoothing her long hair. At 7 years old, she has already learned the importance of presenting a neat appearance for the day's work. John rubs his eyes and looks around the cottage with a slightly confused expression that suggests he has been dreaming, while Thomas requires gentle encouragement to leave the warmth of his woolen blanket. The morning routine that follows represents the reverse of your evening preparations, securing the cottage for daytime absence rather than nighttime security, preparing tools and equipment for agricultural work, ensuring that your family has eaten enough to sustain heavy physical labor until the midday meal. William checks the wooden latch on your door not to keep intruders out, but to ensure that wind will not blow the door open while you are working in Lord Geoffrey's fields. As you step outside your cottage into the grey pre-dawn light, you realize that another cycle of medieval time has completed itself. The night watch has ended, the two-sleep pattern has served its ancient function of dividing the vulnerable hours of darkness into manageable periods of rest and alertness, and your household has successfully navigated another period when peasant families are most susceptible to accident, illness, or attack. The approaching sunrise will bring its own challenges, the physical demands of agricultural labor, the complex social negotiations required to maintain your family's position within the feudal hierarchy, the constant attention to weather, crops, and seasonal changes that determine survival in medieval England. But for now, in these quiet moments before full daylight, you can reflect on the success of another night watch, another period when your family has demonstrated the vigilance, cooperation, and practical wisdom that allows medieval peasants to survive in a world where security depends on community solidarity and individual resourcefulness. The pattern will repeat itself tonight and tomorrow night and every night throughout your medieval life, creating a rhythm of rest and vigilance that connects your family to the ancient human experience of dividing darkness into manageable portions of vulnerability and recovery. And as you begin the day's work, you carry with you the deep knowledge that when evening comes again, you will know exactly how to navigate the mysterious hours between sunset and sunrise, guided by the inherited wisdom of countless generations, who learned to make the night serve the purposes of survival and community solidarity. You are Brother Thomas of Glastonbury Abbey, and the great bell has just sounded the hour of Compline, the final prayer service of your monastic day. As the bronze notes fade across the Somerset countryside, you join the procession of 37 monks filing silently from the choir stalls of your abbey church toward the dormitory that will shelter your sleep until the bell summons you again for matins. The year is 1402, and you have followed this rhythm for 11 years since taking your final vows under the rule of Saint Benedict, yet the approaching night still carries its own unique challenges and opportunities for spiritual development. Your dormitory, like every aspect of life at Glastonbury Abbey, reflects the careful balance between communal living and individual spiritual practice that the rule of Saint Benedict has prescribed for monastic communities throughout medieval Europe. The long, narrow chamber occupies the entire second floor of the abbey's eastern range, its stone walls pierced by small windows that admit minimal light during winter months and serve primarily for ventilation rather than illumination. 38 individual beds line the walls, one for each choir monk plus a spare for visiting brethren or new novices, arranged with mathematical precision that reflects the monastic emphasis on order, discipline, and the sanctification of daily routine. Your own bed, assigned to you according to your position in the community hierarchy, sits precisely 7 feet from Brother Aldrich's on your left and 6 feet from Brother Dunstan's on your right. The rule of Saint Benedict specifies that monks should sleep separately in separate beds while receiving positions for their beds after the manner of their characters according to the dispensation of the abbot. This arrangement means that your location within the dormitory reflects not only your years of profession, but also Abbot Geoffrey's assessment of your spiritual development, your reliability during the night offices, and your influence on younger members of the community. The bed itself represents the austere simplicity that characterizes all aspects of Benedictine life. A wooden frame, barely long enough for your 5-foot 8-inch frame, supports a straw-filled mattress covered by rough woolen blankets. Medieval monastic sources specify that monks' bedding should consist of a mat, a woolen blanket, and a light covering as well as a pillow, sufficient for rest and recovery, but deliberately uncomfortable enough to discourage excessive attachment to physical comfort. Your pillow, stuffed with straw and covered in coarse linen, has molded itself over the years to accommodate your head, creating one of the few personal touches allowed in your rigorously standardized environment. As you prepare for sleep, you follow the ritual prescribed by Saint Benedict himself for the hours between compline and matins. You remove only your outer woolen scapula, the working garment that marks your status as a choir monk, while keeping your linen tunic and woolen undergarments in place. The rule specifically commands that monks should sleep clothed and girded, with girdles or cords, but let them not have knives at their sides while they sleep, lest by chance while dreaming they wound themselves. This provision reflects the practical wisdom accumulated over centuries of communal living, where the safety of individual monks contributes to the security of the entire community. The process of settling into sleep requires its own form of spiritual discipline. Unlike the secular world outside your abbey walls, where peasants and nobles alike divide their night into first sleep, wake period, and second sleep, your monastic schedule follows a different rhythm entirely. Saint Benedict's rule prescribes that monks should sleep until the 8th hour of the night, approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, when the bell for matins will summon you to the choir for the longest and most solemn of the nighttime prayer offices. This schedule means that your sleep period, lasting roughly 5 hours from 9 o'clock until 2 o'clock, must provide sufficient rest to sustain not only the physical demands of agricultural work and copying manuscripts, but also the intense spiritual concentration required for the divine office. The night hours at Glastonbury Abbey are not divided into the natural rhythms that govern secular sleep patterns, but rather organized around the liturgical calendar that sanctifies every moment of monastic existence. As you lie on your straw mattress, you become aware of the sounds that characterize the early hours of monastic night. The dormitory settles into its familiar symphony, the soft breathing of 37 men slowly transitioning from wakefulness to sleep, the occasional creak of wooden bed frames adjusting to shifting weight, the whisper of woolen blankets being arranged for maximum warmth. Brother Aldrich, whose bed lies closest to yours, has developed over his 15 years of profession the ability to fall asleep almost immediately after compline, his breathing settling into deep, regular rhythms that suggest complete surrender to the demands of monastic obedience. But your own path to sleep requires more time and conscious effort. The events of the day continue to circulate through your mind. The copying work you completed in the scriptorium, where you spent 6 hours carefully transcribing passages from Augustine's City of God onto parchment sheets that will eventually become part of the Abbey's growing library. The chapter meeting where Abbot Geoffrey discussed preparations for the feast of St. Edward the Confessor. The brief moment during Vespers when you felt what you can only describe as the presence of divine grace settling over your prayer like morning mist over the Abbey's fish ponds. These memories require what your novice master called custody of the heart, the spiritual discipline of neither clinging to pleasant experiences nor allowing troubling thoughts to disturb your preparation for sleep. Medieval monastic traditions emphasize that the transition from waking consciousness to sleep should itself become a form of prayer, a gradual surrender of individual will to divine providence. The physical environment of your dormitory contributes to this spiritual preparation. The stone walls, 3 feet thick and built from local limestone quarried from the Mendip Hills, maintain a constant temperature that rarely varies more than a few degrees throughout the year. This thermal stability, combined with the absence of individual heating sources, creates an atmosphere that encourages rapid cooling of the body, a natural aid to the onset of sleep that medieval builders understood intuitively, even without modern knowledge of circadian rhythms and thermoregulation. The absence of artificial light represents another crucial element of monastic sleep preparation. Unlike secular households where rushlights or candles might extend evening activities, the abbey observes strict darkness after compline. This policy serves multiple purposes. It conserves expensive lighting materials, reduces fire hazards in a building constructed primarily of wood and thatch, and most importantly, it aligns the community's sleep cycle with the natural rhythms that Saint Benedict believed reflected divine order in creation. As your body temperature drops and your breathing settles into slower rhythms, you become increasingly aware of the larger soundscape that surrounds Glastonbury Abbey during the night hours. Beyond the immediate sounds of the dormitory, you can hear the gentle movements of night shift activities throughout the monastic complex. Brother Infirmarian making his rounds among elderly and sick monks in the abbey's hospital wing. The porter checking the main gates and ensuring that all buildings are secure against fire, theft, or unauthorized entry. The faint sounds of livestock in the abbey's barns and stables, where lay brothers maintain watch over valuable horses, cattle, and sheep. The abbey's location in the Somerset marshlands adds its own nocturnal voice to your sleeping environment. Through the dormitory's small windows comes the distant calling of nightbirds, herons, bitterns, and various species of waterfowl that inhabit the wetlands surrounding your community. These sounds, unlike the human noises of monastic activity, seem to carry you deeper into the natural world that medieval monasticism sought to sanctify through prayer and contemplation. Your training as a choir monk has taught you to use these transitional moments for what the Desert Fathers called the prayer of the heart, a form of contemplative practice that continues even as conscious thought gives way to sleep. This practice involves the repetition of simple phrases often drawn from the Psalms that gradually synchronize with your breathing and heartbeat until they continue almost automatically, creating a bridge between waking prayer and sleeping surrender to divine will. Tonight, as on most nights, you find yourself returning to the words of Psalm 4. In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. The rhythm of these words matches perfectly with the slow deepening of your breath, and their meaning provides comfort against the various anxieties that might otherwise disturb your rest. Concerns about tomorrow's responsibilities in the scriptorium, worries about your spiritual progress, the nagging physical discomfort of your aging joints that remind you, at 34 years old, that a lifetime of kneeling on stone floors and sleeping on straw mattresses exacts its toll on the human body. But even as sleep approaches, part of your monastic training keeps you alert to the passage of time and the approach of matins. Medieval chroniclers noted that experienced monks developed an almost supernatural ability to wake naturally at the appointed hour for night prayer, even without the assistance of bells or other timekeeping devices. This skill, developed through years of practice and spiritual discipline, represents one of the most practical applications of monastic obedience, the alignment of individual will with communal necessity. As consciousness finally begins to fade, you find yourself wondering about the dreams that might visit your sleep, and whether the night hours will bring the kind of spiritual insight that sometimes comes to monks who have learned to make their very rest a form of prayer and service to the divine office that governs every moment of monastic existence. The great bell of Glastonbury Abbey pierces the October darkness with its bronze voice, calling you and your 37 brother monks from the depths of sleep to the sacred duty of matins. Your body responds before your conscious mind fully processes the summons. 5 hours of training in monastic obedience have conditioned your muscles and reflexes to react instantly to the liturgical bells that divide your day into precise periods of prayer, work, and rest. Around you in the dormitory, the sounds of communal awakening create their familiar symphony, the rustle of woolen blankets being thrown aside, the soft pad of bare feet on cold stone floors, the whispered prayers that many monks use to bridge the transition from sleep to wakefulness. Brother Aldrich, whose bed lies closest to yours, sits up with the mechanical precision that marks his 15 years of profession. In the darkness, you can hear him performing the small rituals that prepare a monk for night prayer, the arrangement of his woolen scapula, the tying of his rope belt, the brief sign of the cross that begins every formal monastic activity. His movements create no disturbance, produce no unnecessary sound. This efficiency represents one of the highest achievements of Benedictine formation, the ability to perform necessary tasks with complete attention while maintaining the interior silence that prepares the soul for encounter with the divine. You follow your own version of this preparation, developed through years of 2 o'clock awakenings for the night office. Your feet find your leather sandals without conscious direction. Your hands locate and arrange your clothing through pure muscle memory. Your mind begins the process of transitioning from the physical realm of sleep and bodily comfort to the spiritual demands of liturgical prayer. The rule of Saint Benedict specifically addresses this transition, noting that monks should arise without delay when the signal is given and proceed immediately to the church, yet with all gravity and modesty. The procession from dormitory to choir represents one of the most solemn moments of your monastic day. 38 monks move through the darkness in complete silence, their footsteps creating a rhythm that echoes off the stone walls of the cloister walkway. No artificial light guides your movement. The abbey's strict economy with candles and oil means that only the most essential spaces receive illumination during night hours. Instead, you navigate by memory and touch, following paths that your feet have traced thousands of times over the past 11 years. The choir stalls of Glastonbury Abbey Church represent the architectural heart of your monastic community. Carved from local oak by craftsmen whose families have served the abbey for generations, these wooden seats provide both physical support for long periods of prayer and symbolic representation of your position within the spiritual hierarchy that governs Benedictine life. Your own stall, 7th from the prior's seat on the north side of the choir, reflects your status as a middle-ranking choir monk, no longer a junior member requiring constant supervision, but not yet elevated to the positions of responsibility that come with decades of faithful service. As you settle into your choir stall, the familiar weight of the night office begins to assert itself. Matins, the longest and most complex of the canonical hours, requires approximately 2 hours of continuous prayer, chanting, and liturgical reading. Medieval sources indicate that this extended period of nocturnal worship serves multiple spiritual purposes. It breaks the night into manageable periods that prevent the kind of deep, uninterrupted sleep that might encourage spiritual laxity. It provides opportunity for extended meditation on scriptural texts that receive only brief attention during daytime hours. And it creates a communal experience of vulnerability and dedication that strengthens the bonds between individual monks and their shared commitment to the religious life. The opening verses of Matins carry special significance during these dark, October hours. O God, come to my assistance. O Lord, make haste to help me, the cantor intones, and the choir responds with the ancient words that acknowledge human dependence on divine grace. Your voice joins the communal chant automatically, but your mind focuses on the meaning behind the familiar phrases. This invocation, repeated at the beginning of every canonical hour, takes on deeper resonance during the vulnerable night hours when physical discomfort, spiritual dryness, and simple human fatigue make the demands of monastic life feel most challenging. The first nocturne of Matins focuses on readings from the Book of Job, a liturgical choice that seems particularly appropriate during these pre-dawn hours when the human soul confronts its own limitations and dependence on divine providence. Brother Reader, whose clear voice has proclaimed sacred texts for nearly 20 years, stands at the lectern and begins the familiar passage. Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived. The words echo through the choir with haunting beauty, their meaning deepened by the darkness that surrounds your community and the physical discomfort that reminds every monk of human fragility. As the readings continue, you find your attention moving between different levels of awareness. Part of your consciousness follows the liturgical text, noting the theological themes and spiritual insights that emerge from careful attention to sacred scripture. Another part of your mind monitors your physical condition, tracking the gradual warming of your body as standing and singing increase circulation, noting the slight stiffness in your knees that results from kneeling on stone floors during the previous day's work in the vegetable gardens. But perhaps most importantly, you maintain awareness of the communal dimension of night prayer. The voices of your brother monks create a sonic environment that transcends individual vocal abilities, producing harmonies and resonances that seem to emerge from the very stones of the church building. Brother Aldrich's slightly flat tenor blends with Brother Dunstan's rich bass, while the younger voices of recent novices add brightness to the overall texture. This musical collaboration represents one of the most tangible expressions of the Benedictine ideal of unity in diversity, individual talents and limitations contributing to a collective worship that exceeds what any single monk could achieve alone. The responsories that punctuate the nocturnes require particularly careful attention during night prayer. These antiphonal chants, where the choir divides into two groups that respond to each other across the central aisle of the church, demand precise timing and clear articulation despite the physical challenges of singing in cold air after 5 hours of sleep. Your training in the Schola Cantorum, the specialized group of monks responsible for maintaining liturgical music, has taught you to project your voice effectively while maintaining the interior silence that prevents singing from becoming mere performance rather than prayer. As the second nocturne begins, focusing on readings from St. Augustine's commentaries on the Psalms, you become aware that the quality of darkness outside the church has begun to change. The absolute blackness of deep night is giving way to the barely perceptible gradations that signal the approach of dawn. This transition happens so gradually that you cannot identify the exact moment when it begins, but your body recognizes the shift with the instinctive awareness that connects monastic life to the natural rhythms of creation. The physical demands of matins begin to assert themselves more forcefully as the office continues. 2 hours of standing, sitting, and kneeling in a cold church building challenges even the most robust constitution, particularly during October, nights when the stone walls radiate coolness that penetrates woolen clothing and chills exposed hands and faces. You find yourself employing the small strategies that experienced monks develop to maintain concentration despite physical discomfort, shifting weight from one foot to the other during long periods of standing, flexing fingers to maintain circulation, using controlled breathing techniques to generate internal warmth. The third nocturne brings readings from the night's gospel passage, and the familiar words take on new meaning in the context of nocturnal worship. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went into a lonely place, and there he prayed. The image of Christ seeking solitude for prayer during the vulnerable hours before dawn resonates powerfully with your own experience of leaving sleep and comfort to pursue spiritual discipline in community with your brother, monks. As Matins draws toward its conclusion with the singing of the Te Deum, that ancient hymn of praise that has concluded the night office for over 1,000 years, you find yourself reflecting on the spiritual significance of this interruption to natural sleep patterns. The decision to wake for prayer during the hours when the human body most naturally seeks rest represents a fundamental rejection of purely physical priorities in favor of spiritual ones. Yet, paradoxically, this rejection of natural rhythms seems to create its own deeper harmony with the created order, aligning human consciousness with the divine purpose that governs all existence. The final prayer of Matins leaves the community poised between night and day, between the world of sleep and the approaching demands of another day, organized around the twin poles of prayer and work that define Benedictine life. But before returning to your dormitory for the brief period of rest that remains before prime signals the beginning of the active day, you find yourself wondering whether the hours of second sleep will bring the kind of profound rest that sometimes follows periods of intense spiritual concentration, and how your dreams might be shaped by the sacred texts and ancient melodies that have filled the past 2 hours of communal prayer. The silence that follows the final Amen of Matins carries its own sacred quality as you and your 37 brother monks process slowly back through the cloister toward the dormitory. The great church of Glastonbury Abbey, which moments ago resonated with 2 hours of chanted prayer, now settles into the deep quiet that will last until the bell for prime announces the beginning of another day organized around the ancient rhythm of the divine office. Your feet know the path through darkness without conscious guidance, following the same stones that have supported this procession of night worshippers for generations of monks who have learned to make their sleep serve the purposes of communal prayer and individual spiritual development. The October air carries the first hint of approaching winter as you move through the covered walkway that connects the church to your sleeping quarters. Through the open arches of the cloister, you can see that the quality of darkness has shifted subtly during the 2 hours of matins. Not yet the grey of approaching dawn, but no longer the absolute blackness of deep night. This transitional period, which medieval monasticism understood as especially conducive to spiritual insight, creates an atmosphere where the boundary between prayer and rest becomes fluid, allowing consciousness to move naturally between liturgical worship and the deeper surrender that characterizes what St. Benedict called holy sleep. Returning to your straw mattress after the intensity of night prayer requires its own form of spiritual discipline. Your body, awakened from deep sleep and then sustained through 2 hours of standing, sitting, and kneeling in a cold church, must now transition back to the horizontal position and the slower breathing that will allow whatever sleep remains before prime. But your mind, stimulated by the sacred texts of matins and the communal experience of liturgical chanting, often resists the immediate return to unconsciousness, preferring to continue processing the theological insights and spiritual resonances that emerge from careful attention to the night office. The dormitory receives you and your brother monks with the familiar embrace of shared silence and individual solitude. Each monk settles into his assigned bed without conversation or unnecessary movement, but the collective experience of the past 2 hours creates an invisible bond that connects 38 individual experiences of returning to rest. Brother Aldrich, whose discipline in falling asleep you have long admired, arranges his woolen blankets with practiced efficiency and settles into the regular breathing that signals his rapid return to sleep. Brother Dunstan, younger and perhaps more affected by the spiritual intensity of matins, lies quietly for several minutes before his breathing settles into the rhythms that indicate successful transition to rest. Your own return to sleep follows patterns that have developed over 11 years of monastic profession. The physical discomfort of cold feet and slightly stiff joints from kneeling on stone floors gradually gives way to the warming effect of woolen blankets and the relaxation that comes from horizontal rest. But the more significant challenge involves managing the continued mental activity generated by the night office. The scriptural phrases that continue to echo in your memory, the theological questions raised by the readings from St. Augustine, the aesthetic pleasure derived from particularly beautiful moments in the liturgical chanting. Medieval monastic sources suggest that experienced monks learned to use this post-matins period for what the spiritual tradition calls passive contemplation, a form of prayer that requires no conscious effort or intellectual activity, but simply allows the mind to rest in the divine presence encountered during liturgical worship. This practice involves neither sleep nor active thought, but rather a kind of wakeful rest that continues the prayer of matins through a different mode of consciousness. As you lie on your straw mattress, you find yourself entering this contemplative state almost automatically. The words of the night's gospel reading, "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went into a lonely place, and there he prayed," continue to resonate in your memory. But now, without the analytical attention that characterized your listening during the office itself. Instead, the image of Christ seeking solitude for prayer becomes a kind of spiritual landscape in which your own consciousness can rest, finding in the example of divine devotion a model for human surrender to providential care. The sounds that surround your return to sleep create their own form of prayer. The breathing of 37 monks gradually settling into rest produces a rhythm that seems to echo the antiphonal structure of liturgical chanting, while the occasional rustle of blankets or creak of wooden bed frames punctuates the silence with reminders of the embodied nature of spiritual life. From outside the dormitory, the distant sounds of night continue, the call of a barn owl hunting in the abbey's meadows, the soft movement of livestock in their stalls, the barely audible footsteps of the porter making his final rounds to ensure the security of the monastic complex. The period between matins and prime, typically lasting 2 to 3 hours depending on the season, serves functions that extend beyond simple rest and recovery. The rule of St. Benedict specifically notes that this time should provide opportunity for what modern sleep researchers would recognize as REM sleep, the dreaming phase that appears crucial for memory consolidation and emotional processing. For monks whose days are filled with intensive scriptural study, liturgical memorization, and spiritual discipline, this period of dream-rich sleep serves essential cognitive functions that support both intellectual learning and spiritual development. Your dreams, when they come, often reflect the themes and images of the night office, but transformed by the mysterious processes that occur during sleep. Tonight, you find yourself dreaming of vast libraries filled with illuminated manuscripts, their pages glowing with golden letters that seem to move and reshape themselves into new configurations of meaning. In the dream, you are simultaneously the scribe copying the texts and the reader discovering their significance, experiencing the circular relationship between human effort and divine revelation that characterizes monastic approaches to sacred literature. But even in sleep, part of your monastic training maintains awareness of time's passage and the approach of prime. This skill, developed through years of practice, allows you to rest deeply while remaining alert to the internal clock that will wake you naturally just before the bell announces the beginning of another day organized around the fundamental Benedictine principle of ora et labora, pray and work. It represents one of the most practical expressions of the spiritual discipline that governs every aspect of monastic life, the ability to surrender completely to necessary rest while maintaining the interior vigilance that serves communal needs. As the hours pass and the quality of darkness outside the dormitory windows begins its gradual transition toward dawn, your sleep deepens into the restorative phases that will prepare your body and mind for another day of copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, tending vegetables in the abbey gardens, and participating in the 7 remaining canonical hours that structure monastic time. The dreams that visit this deeper sleep often carry the spiritual insights that emerge from the synthesis of liturgical prayer, intellectual study, and physical labor that defines the Benedictine path towards union with divine will. The approach of prime, still more than an hour away, begins to register in your unconscious awareness as a gradual lightening of sleep, a natural preparation for the bell that will summon you and your brother monks to begin another day of seeking God through the ancient practices of communal prayer and individual spiritual discipline. And as you rest in this deeper phase of monastic sleep, you carry with you the profound satisfaction that comes from having successfully navigated another night office, another opportunity to demonstrate through the sacrifice of natural sleep the priority of spiritual duties over physical comfort that lies at the heart of the religious life you have chosen as your path toward salvation and service to the divine purpose that governs all creation. You are Lady Eleanor de Montfort, wife to Sir Geoffrey de Montfort, Lord of Hartwell Manor in the county of Oxfordshire. And as the October evening light fades through the oiled parchment windows of your solar, you oversee the complex ritual that transforms your household from its daytime configuration into the carefully orchestrated sleeping arrangements that will shelter 23 souls through another medieval night. The year is 1396, and your manor house, built of local limestone and timber frame, with its great hall, solar, kitchen complex and servant quarters, represents not merely a residence, but a small community whose security, warmth and survival depend on the precise execution of routines that have been refined through generations of English noble families. The centerpiece of your evening preparations is the great bed that dominates the solar, your private chamber that serves as both living quarters and symbolic representation of your family's status within the feudal hierarchy. This bed, constructed by craftsmen from Winchester at considerable expense 5 years ago when you married Sir Geoffrey, measures 8 feet in length and 6 feet in width, making it easily capable of accommodating not only yourself and your husband, but also the various family members, guests, and trusted servants whose presence in your bed represents both practical necessity and social privilege. Historical sources document that medieval noble beds served functions far beyond simple sleeping arrangements, operating as centers of social interaction, symbols of hospitality, and practical solutions to the challenges of heating large stone buildings during cold months. Your own bed reflects these multiple purposes in its elaborate construction, a solid wooden frame supporting a thick mattress stuffed with goose feathers collected from your manor's own waterfowl, covered by linen sheets woven from flax grown in your domain lands and topped with coverlets of silk imported from the Low Countries at considerable expense. The bed's curtains, hanging from an intricate wooden canopy carved with your family's heraldic devices, serve essential functions beyond mere decoration. Made from heavy woolen fabric dyed a rich burgundy color using madder root from your kitchen gardens, these curtains create a private space within the larger chamber while providing crucial insulation against the drafts that penetrate even well-built stone buildings. When fully closed, the bed becomes a warm, micro-environment that can maintain comfortable temperatures even when the solar's brazier has burned low and the October wind howls through the gaps around wooden shutters. Tonight's sleeping arrangements reflect the complex social dynamics that govern your household throughout the winter months. Your husband, Jeffrey, will occupy his traditional position on the bed's left side, nearest the wall, a placement that offers both protection from drafts and strategic positioning to respond to any disturbance that might threaten the chamber's security. You will sleep in the center position, demonstrating your status as the lady of the manor while remaining accessible to your infant daughter Matilda, who at 8 months old still requires nursing during the night hours. Little Matilda will share the bed in a carefully constructed nest of soft wool blankets positioned between yourself and the bed's right edge, where your waiting woman Agnes maintains vigilant watch throughout the night. Agnes, now 43 years old and in service to your family for over 20 years, has earned the privilege of sleeping in the great bed through her demonstrated loyalty, practical skills, and the trust that comes from years of faithful service during times of both prosperity and crisis. Your older children occupy positions that reflect both their age and their importance to the family's future. Your son Robert, heir to Hartwell Manor at 12 years old, has his own smaller bed positioned against the solar's eastern wall, close enough to participate in family conversations, but separate enough to demonstrate his growing independence and preparation for adult responsibilities. Your daughter Catherine, 10 years old and already being prepared for marriage negotiations that will strengthen your family's political alliances, sleeps on a truckle bed that slides beneath the great bed during daytime hours and emerges each evening to provide her with appropriate accommodation near her parents. The logistics of preparing 23 people for sleep in a medieval manor house requires coordination that begins well before sunset. Your household steward, Master William, has spent the past hour ensuring that all external doors are secured with heavy wooden bars, that the night watch has been properly assigned among your male servants, and that sufficient fuel remains banked in the kitchen fires to maintain warmth until morning. The complex arrangements necessary to house, feed, and protect your extended household represent one of the most challenging aspects of medieval domestic management, requiring constant attention to security, resources, and the delicate social negotiations that maintain harmony among people of vastly different status and background. Your kitchen servants, 3 women responsible for food, preparation, serving, and cleaning, will spend the night in the kitchen complex, where the residual heat from cooking fires provides warmth while their proximity to food stores deters theft. Medieval domestic arrangements typically placed servants in sleeping locations that reflected both their duties and their trustworthiness, with the most sensitive positions near valuable household goods and the least reliable individuals in locations where supervision remained possible. The stable servants responsible for your horses and other livestock will maintain their watch in the building that houses your most valuable animals. Your destrier, the great warhorse that represents Sir Geoffrey's military status and capability, requires protection not only from theft but also from the wolves that still roam the forests surrounding Hartwell Manor. The complex schedules that rotate responsibility for night watch among your male servants ensure that every vulnerable area of your property receives attention, while allowing each man sufficient rest to perform his daytime duties effectively. Your personal chamber servants occupy sleeping positions that reflect their intimate access to your family's private life. Besides Agnes, who shares your bed, 2 additional waiting women sleep on straw pallets arranged near the solar's fireplace. Young Mary, recently arrived from her peasant family to begin training in household service, lies closest to the door, where she can respond quickly to any summons while learning through observation the behaviors and expectations that govern service. In a noble household, the Great Hall, which serves as the center of your manor's public life during daylight hours, transforms each evening into a communal sleeping chamber for the various workers, guests, and temporary residents who require shelter, but lack the status to warrant private accommodation. Tonight, this space houses two traveling merchants who have paid for safe lodging while conducting business in the local market town, a master carpenter and his apprentice who are completing repairs to your mill, and several of your field workers, whose cottages are currently uninhabitable due to roof damage from recent storms. Medieval hospitality customs required noble households to provide accommodation for travelers, craftsmen, and others whose business or circumstances brought them within the manor's protection. This obligation created a constant flow of strangers through your household, requiring careful management to maintain security while fulfilling the social expectations that supported your family's reputation and political influence. The process of actually settling into sleep requires its own elaborate ritual. As your family and immediate servants gather in the solar, Agnes helps you remove your outer woolen gown and arrange your linen chemise for sleeping. The heavy fabric, dyed with expensive blue woad that demonstrates your family's prosperity, must be carefully folded and stored to prevent damage from insects or moisture. Your silk-lined cloak, imported from Flanders at considerable cost, receives similar attention before being placed in the wooden chest that contains your most valuable clothing. Sir Geoffrey follows his own version of this preparation, removing his woolen doublet and leather belt while keeping his linen undergarments in place. Medieval sleeping customs, even among the nobility, involved considerably less undressing than modern habits might suggest. The combination of cold stone buildings and the lack of efficient heating made complete nudity impractical, except during the warmest summer months. As you settle into your position in the great bed, baby Matilda nursing contentedly at your breast, you become aware of the sounds that characterize evening at Hartwell Manor. The kitchen servants are completing their final cleaning tasks, their quiet conversation, and the soft clatter of wooden implements creating a backdrop of domestic activity. From the great hall comes the murmur of travelers and workers settling into their temporary accommodation, punctuated by occasional laughter and the shifting of straw-filled pallets on the stone floor. The security arrangements that protect your sleeping household involve both physical barriers and human vigilance. Master William has assigned the night watch among your most trusted male servants, creating a rotation that ensures every approach to the manor receives attention throughout the dark hours. The main gate, the kitchen complex, the stable buildings, and the base of the tower that contains your solar all have designated guardians who will remain alert for any signs of intrusion, fire, or other threats that might endanger your family and dependents. But even with these precautions, you know that medieval night brings dangers that no amount of preparation can completely eliminate. Disease, accident, criminal activity, and the constant threat of fire create an environment where survival depends on constant vigilance, community cooperation, and the kind of practical wisdom that comes from generations of experience in managing the vulnerabilities that accompany darkness in a world without artificial lighting or professional emergency services. As sleep begins to claim your consciousness, you find yourself listening to the gradual settling of your household into its nocturnal configuration, wondering what the night hours will bring and whether the complex arrangements you have orchestrated will successfully shelter your family and dependents through another period when the medieval world becomes most dangerous and unpredictable. The sound that wakes you comes not from outside Hartwell Manor, but from within your own solar. baby Matilda's soft whimpering that signals her need for nursing during what medieval people understood as the natural interval between first and second sleep. Agnes stirs immediately beside you, her 43 years of experience as a waiting woman having trained her to wake at the slightest sound that might indicate your need for assistance. Sir Geoffrey continues breathing in the deep, regular rhythm that suggests his first sleep remains undisturbed, though you know from 7 years of marriage that any unusual sound will bring him instantly to full alertness. This wakeful period, which medieval sources document as occurring naturally throughout noble households across England, transforms your solar from a place of communal rest into a different kind of social space. The heavy curtains around your bed create a warm, intimate environment where family members can interact quietly without disturbing others, while the residual heat from the evening's brazier provides just enough warmth to make movement outside. The bed cover's tolerable for short periods. As you arrange yourself to nurse Matilda, Agnes rises silently and moves to the wooden chest that contains essential supplies for nighttime care. Medieval noble households, unlike peasant cottages that might lack any artificial lighting during night hours, maintained small oil lamps for emergencies and essential tasks. Agnes retrieves one of these lamps, a simple clay vessel filled with rendered sheep fat and fitted with a linen wick, and lights it using the technique of striking flint against steel over carefully prepared tinder. The warm, flickering light that fills your bed enclosure reveals the complex social dynamics that govern nighttime in a medieval noble household. Your daughter Catherine has awakened on her truckle bed and lies quietly, listening to the soft sounds of family interaction while learning through observation the behaviors and expectations that will govern her own future role as a noble wife and mother. Your son Robert remains deeply asleep in his separate bed, but his breathing has shifted to the lighter pattern that suggests his own natural transition toward the wakeful interval that characterizes medieval sleep patterns. The nursing process requires time and patience that medieval mothers learned to integrate into the rhythm of divided nighttime rest. Matilda feeds eagerly, her small hands grasping at your linen chemise, while she drinks the warm milk that represents her primary source of nutrition during these crucial early months of life. Medieval childcare practices emphasized the importance of frequent feeding during night hours, both for infant health and as a natural method of birth spacing that helped families manage their reproductive choices in an era without reliable contraception. While you nurse, Agnes performs the quiet activities that make the wakeful interval both productive and conducive to eventual return to sleep. She checks the brazier that heats your solar, adding small pieces of charcoal to maintain steady warmth throughout the night hours. She examines Matilda's woolen blankets for dampness and retrieves clean linen cloths from your supplies in case the baby requires changing. Most importantly, she maintains the kind of alert watchfulness that allows other family members to relax while ensuring that any unusual sound or circumstance receives immediate attention. From beyond your bed curtains, you can hear evidence that the wakeful interval affects your entire household. Young Mary, sleeping on her straw pallet near the fireplace, has awakened and is quietly adding wood to the fire that keeps your solar warm. The soft sounds of her movement, the whisper of her bare feet on rushes, the gentle crack of burning wood settling into new configurations create a backdrop of domestic activity that characterizes medieval nights in noble households. The sounds from other parts of Hartwell Manor tell their own story of community-wide wakefulness during the interval between first and second sleep. From the great hall below comes the murmur of quiet conversation among the travelers and workers who share that space for the night. Someone is moving about in the kitchen complex, probably one of your servants checking the fires that must be maintained throughout the night. to ensure hot food for tomorrow's meals and to provide security against the constant threat of accidental fire. Master William, your household steward, appears to be making his nocturnal rounds through the manor buildings. You can hear his measured footsteps in the courtyard below your solar, pausing at intervals that suggest he is checking the various guardsmen assigned to night watch duty. These security patrols, conducted several times during the night hours, represent one of the most crucial responsibilities of manor management, ensuring that your family's property, possessions and dependents remain protected during the vulnerable hours when most of the household sleeps. The oil lamp that Agnes maintains provides enough light for essential activities while creating the kind of intimate atmosphere that medieval noble families used for the quiet conversations and family bonding that daytime responsibilities often prevented. Sir Geoffrey has awakened naturally and lies quietly beside you, occasionally reaching over to touch Matilda's soft hair or to adjust the woolen blankets that keep all three of you warm in the October night air. "The wool merchant seemed pleased with our fleeces," Sir Geoffrey murmurs quietly, his voice carrying the satisfaction that comes from successful negotiations that will provide income for your household's winter needs. The price he offered should cover the repairs to the mill roof and leave sufficient silver for purchasing salt and spices before the roads become impassable. These practical considerations occupy much of your husband's attention during the wakeful intervals, when the demands of daytime activities give way to the kind of planning and reflection that helps manage a complex rural estate. Your conversation continues in whispers that will not disturb the sleeping members of your household while addressing the various concerns that require coordination between Lord and Lady of the manor. The harvest has been adequate, but not abundant, requiring careful management of grain stores to ensure sufficient food for both your immediate family and the servants and workers who depend on your household for survival. The recent storms damaged several peasant cottages on your lands, creating obligations for assistance that must be balanced against your own family's needs and resources. As Matilda finishes nursing and settles back into sleep, you become aware of the gradual changes in atmosphere that signal the passage of time during the medieval night. The air in your solar has cooled slightly despite Agnes's attention to the brazier, and the sounds from other parts of the manor have shifted toward the quieter activities that characterize the period when most people begin preparing for their return to second sleep. Agnes performs the final tasks that will allow your family to settle back into rest, extinguishing the oil lamp to conserve fuel and prevent fire hazards, ensuring that Matilda is warmly wrapped and positioned safely between yourself and the bed's edge, checking that the heavy curtains are properly arranged to maintain warmth and privacy. Her movements demonstrate the expertise that comes from 20 years of managing noble household routines, each action performed efficiently and quietly to minimize disturbance to others. The return to sleep in a medieval noble household requires its own form of social coordination. Catherine settles back onto her truckle bed with the disciplined silence that reflects her training in appropriate behavior, while Robert's breathing indicates his own natural transition from the wakeful interval back toward deeper rest. Sir Geoffrey arranges his position to accommodate both your comfort and the security considerations that require him to remain alert to any unusual sounds that might signal threats to the household. As consciousness begins to fade again, you find yourself listening to the sounds that characterize the transition from the wakeful interval back to communal sleep. The wind outside has picked up, creating the kind of rhythmic sound against the manor's stone walls that often helps induce deeper rest. From the stable buildings comes the soft movement of horses shifting in their stalls, while the night watch maintains its quiet patrol through the various areas that require protection. The complex social dynamics that govern sleeping arrangements in your household represent more than simple convenience or tradition. They reflect fundamental principles of medieval society that emphasize protection, hierarchy, and mutual responsibility. The arrangement of bodies in your solar, from your own central position in the great bed to Catherine's truckle bed to the servants' pallets near the fireplace, creates a physical map of social relationships that governs every aspect of life. At Hartwell Manor, but even as sleep approaches, part of your attention remains focused on the responsibilities that come with your position as Lady of the Manor. Medieval noblewomen, historical sources document, bore ultimate responsibility for household management, servant supervision, and the complex logistics that kept extended families and their dependents fed, clothed, and protected. This responsibility extends through the night hours, requiring the kind of alertness that allows immediate response to emergencies while maintaining the rest necessary for effective daytime leadership. As second sleep begins to claim your consciousness, you carry with you the deep satisfaction that comes from successfully managing another evening's complex arrangements, wondering what the remaining hours of darkness will bring and whether the careful preparations you have orchestrated will carry your household safely through to another dawn. The sound that brings you back to consciousness during the hours before dawn carries an urgency that immediately alerts every survival instinct. Developed through years of managing a medieval household, it is not the gentle crying of baby Matilda or the familiar sounds of servants moving about their nighttime duties, but rather the sharp bark of dogs from the direction of your manor's main gate, a sound that could signal anything from a late arriving traveller to the approach of armed men with hostile intentions. Sir Geoffrey responds instantly, his years of military training bringing him to full alertness, while his hand moves automatically toward the sword that hangs within easy reach of your bed. Agnes rises silently from her position beside you, her experience as a waiting woman having taught her to wake completely and immediately when circumstances require quick response. She moves to the window of your solar and carefully opens one of the wooden shutters just enough to peer out toward the courtyard below, where torches carried by your night watchman create pools of flickering light against the October darkness. The scene that greets her appears routine, Master William directing two guardsmen toward the main gate while maintaining the calm efficiency that characterizes well-run household security procedures. "Travellers, my lady," Agnes whispers, after several moments of careful observation. Master William is admitting someone through the main gate, but the guards remain alert rather than relaxed. This assessment provides some reassurance while acknowledging that medieval nights often brought unexpected visitors whose intentions might range from simple requests for shelter to more complex political or commercial business that required careful evaluation before admission to your household. The medieval obligation of hospitality, particularly for noble families like yours, created a constant stream of visitors whose arrival at any hour required accommodation and assessment. Medieval hospitality customs mandated that travelers of appropriate social status receive shelter, food, and protection, while merchants, craftsmen, and others conducting legitimate business deserved consideration even when their arrival disrupted household routines. But the same customs that required generous hospitality also demanded careful evaluation of visitors' credentials, intentions, and potential threat to household security. Sir Geoffrey rises from the bed and moves to join Agnes at the window, his movements creating minimal disturbance to avoid waking other members of your family unnecessarily. Through the partially opened shutter, you can see him examining the scene below with the practiced eye of a knight trained to assess potential military situations quickly and accurately. The courtyard activity appears controlled and routine, But medieval life has taught both of you that apparent normalcy can shift quickly into crisis requiring immediate defensive action.
"Two men on horseback," Sir Geoffrey murmurs, his voice carrying the assessment that comes from years of evaluating strangers' potential threat or value to your household. "Well mounted," which suggests legitimate business rather than brigandage.
Master William is conducting proper procedures for admission. This observation provides additional reassurance while acknowledging that even wealthy travellers might carry hostile intentions disguised as commercial or social purposes. The process of admitting late-night visitors to a medieval manor requires elaborate security protocols that balance hospitality obligations against family protection needs. Master William, as your household steward, bears responsibility for questioning travellers, evaluating their credentials, and determining appropriate accommodation while maintaining readiness to refuse admission or summon additional defenders if circumstances warrant such measures. These decisions, made during vulnerable night hours when most of your household sleeps, require the kind of judgment and experience that comes from years of managing complex domestic situations. As the minutes pass and the courtyard activity settles into the routine patterns that suggest successful accommodation of legitimate visitors, you find yourself reflecting on the broader context that makes medieval nights simultaneously periods of rest and constant vigilance. Unlike modern times, when artificial lighting, professional police forces, and reliable communication systems provide security infrastructure, medieval families depend entirely on their own resources and the reciprocal protection agreements that bind rural communities together through networks of mutual obligation and shared defense. Your solar, positioned on the manor's second floor with thick stone walls and narrow windows, represents one of the most secure locations available to your family during night hours. But even this relative safety requires constant maintenance. Through the activities of guards, servants, and the complex social arrangements that ensure every vulnerable point receives appropriate attention. The sleeping arrangements that place your family in the most protected interior positions while positioning trusted servants near doors and windows reflect strategic thinking that medieval nobles learned as essential survival skills. Baby Matilda has awakened during the disturbance but remains calm in the secure environment created by your bed's warm enclosure and the presence of familiar family members. Her 8-month-old awareness includes recognition of normal household sounds versus the tension that accompanies potential threats, and tonight her peaceful demeanor provides additional confirmation that the situation requires attention but not alarm. Medieval children, raised in households where security concerns were constant factors in daily life, often developed surprisingly acute sensitivity to the emotional atmosphere that indicated whether adult responses reflected routine caution or genuine danger. Catherine has also awakened on her truckle bed and lies quietly, observing the adult responses to unexpected visitors while learning through example the behaviors and decision-making processes that will govern her own future role as a noble wife responsible for household management and family protection. Her training in appropriate conduct includes understanding when to remain silent, when to ask questions, and how to distinguish between situations that require immediate action versus those that demand patient observation and careful evaluation. The sound of voices from the great hall below indicates that Master William has successfully admitted the travellers and begun the process of providing appropriate accommodation. Medieval hospitality protocols required that visitors of noble or merchant status receive food, drink, and comfortable sleeping arrangements, while their horses required proper care in your stable facilities. These obligations created additional work for your servants during night hours, while providing opportunities for gathering news, conducting business, and maintaining the social connections that supported your family's political and economic interests. Geoffrey returns to the bed after confirming that the situation requires no immediate action beyond the normal security procedures that Master William executes with practiced competence. His movement back into the warm enclosure created by your bed curtains signals the household's return to the restful activities that characterize the period between the wakeful interval and the final period of sleep before dawn. But even as he settles back into his position beside you, part of his attention remains alert to any sounds that might indicate changing circumstances requiring renewed vigilance. The oil lamp that Agnes had extinguished during your earlier return to sleep remains unlit, conserving fuel while acknowledging that the current situation requires no special lighting beyond the torches maintained by your security guards. Medieval household management involved constant attention to resource conservation, particularly for expensive items like oil, candles, and other artificial lighting materials that represented significant expenditures in your annual budget for domestic operations. As you settle back into the position that will allow return to the final period of night's sleep, you find yourself grateful for the complex systems of security, service, and social cooperation that allow your family to rest safely, despite the uncertainties that characterize medieval life. The arrangements that govern sleeping at Hartwell Manor, from the positioning of family members in your great bed to the rotation of guard duties among your male servants, represent generations of accumulated wisdom about surviving and prospering in a world where protection depends entirely on human vigilance and community solidarity. The sounds that accompany your household's return to sleep create their own form of reassurance. The quiet conversation of guards resuming their posts, the settling of newly arrived travelers into temporary accommodation in your great hall, the gradual restoration of the peaceful atmosphere that allows multiple families and individuals to share sleeping space while maintaining appropriate social distinctions and security precautions. As consciousness fades and second sleep reclaims your attention, you carry with you the deep satisfaction that comes from successful management of unexpected challenges, confident that the systems you have helped establish and maintain will continue protecting your family and dependents through the remaining hours of darkness until dawn brings another day of managing the complex responsibilities that define life as a medieval noblewoman charged with household leadership and community service. You are Walter the Thatcher of Brigstock Village in Northamptonshire, and as the December darkness falls before the afternoon work bells have finished ringing, you know that tonight will test every survival skill your 47 years have taught you about enduring what medieval people called the Long Dark, that period between the feast of St. Martin and Candlemas when night claims more than half of each day, and the very architecture of human consciousness must adapt to an existence where darkness dominates light. The year is 1348, and this winter promises to be particularly harsh, with reports from travellers suggesting that the Thames has frozen solid enough to support cart traffic, and that wolves have been seen approaching village edges throughout the Midlands. Your cottage, built with the specialised knowledge that comes from 3 decades of working with thatch and timber, represents a fortress against winter darkness, designed according to principles that your grandfather learned from his grandfather in an unbroken chain of accumulated wisdom about surviving English winters without adequate heating, artificial lighting, or the food preservation techniques that might sustain a family through months of agricultural dormancy. The walls, constructed from wattle and daub using techniques perfected by generations of village craftsmen, incorporate subtle modifications that reflect your professional understanding of airflow, moisture control, and heat retention. Knowledge that could mean the difference between survival and death during the hardest months. The thatching that covers your cottage roof demonstrates the specialized skills that have made you valuable to every family in Brigstock Village and the surrounding hamlets. Using wheat straw harvested specifically for construction rather than animal feed, you have created a covering that will shed rain and snow while providing insulation that can reduce heat loss by more than half compared to simple wooden roofing. The thick layer of straw laid in overlapping patterns that channel water away from the structure while trapping air for thermal protection represents not merely shelter, but a complex technology developed through centuries of experimentation with the materials available to medieval English peasants. Your household this December includes not only your wife Marjorie and your 3 surviving children, John, 15, Alice, 12, and little Edmund, 7, but also your elderly mother, now 63 and no longer capable of the heavy physical labor that sustains peasant families, and your brother's widow, Isabella, whose husband died in the autumn harvest, accident that left her and her infant son dependent on your family's charity. Medieval household composition often reflected these kinds of emergency arrangements, where extended family members and others requiring assistance created complex domestic situations that strained resources while fulfilling social obligations, that bound rural communities together through networks of mutual support. The challenge of keeping 8 people fed, warm, and healthy during the months when agricultural work becomes impossible requires planning and resource management that begins immediately after harvest and continues through careful rationing and conservation techniques that govern every aspect of winter survival. Your grain stores, carefully calculated to last from November through March, occupy wooden chests that you built yourself and positioned in the driest areas of your cottage to prevent the mold and rot that could transform adequate supplies into famine conditions. The preservation techniques that will sustain your family through winter: salted pork from the pig, slaughtered in November, dried vegetables from Marjorie's garden, fermented cabbage that provides essential nutrition during months without fresh food, represent knowledge accumulated through generations of seasonal survival in a climate that offers little margin for error. But perhaps the most crucial challenge you face during these longest nights involves managing light and warmth in ways that conserve precious resources while maintaining the illumination necessary for essential winter tasks. Medieval lighting sources available to peasant families consisted primarily of rush lights, those carefully prepared stems of rush plants dipped in sheep fat that provided roughly 1 hour of dim light before requiring replacement. Your winter supply of rushes, gathered during the summer months from marshy areas near the village mill and prepared by your wife and daughters through the tedious process of peeling away the outer covering to expose the pithy core, represents one of your most valuable household resources. The mathematics of winter lighting create constant tension between necessity and conservation. Each rushlight requires approximately 1 tablespoon of rendered animal fat, meaning that a single evening of extended light consumption could exhaust supplies intended to last several days. The careful rationing that governs your family's use of artificial light means that most winter activities must be completed during the brief daylight hours, while evening tasks are limited to those that require minimal illumination. Spinning, mending, food preparation that can be accomplished by touch and memory rather than clear vision. Your cottage's interior layout reflects modifications designed specifically for winter survival in conditions where every source of heat must be maximized and conserved. The single room that houses your family during cold months has been arranged so that your bed, a wooden frame supporting a straw mattress that you restuff monthly to maintain insulation properties, sits closest to the fireplace while remaining far enough away to prevent accidental ignition of bedding materials. The careful positioning of sleeping areas, cooking space, and storage locations creates efficient traffic patterns that minimize heat loss through unnecessary movement, while allowing your family to perform essential tasks without disrupting others, rest or work. The fireplace that dominates one wall of your cottage represents both salvation and constant danger during winter months. built from local stones and clay mortar with a chimney that you repaired yourself using knowledge gained from years of observing how smoke behaves in different weather conditions. This central feature provides cooking capability, essential warmth, and the only reliable source of ignition for rushlight lighting. But the same fire that sustains life also poses continuous threats. Accidental ignition of clothing, furniture, or thatch could destroy your cottage within minutes, while inadequate ventilation could fill your living space with lethal smoke during periods when weather prevents proper chimney draft. The fuel that feeds your winter fire comes from multiple sources that require careful management throughout the cold months. Dried wood, gathered during autumn when fallen branches and deadfall provide natural fuel supplies, must be supplemented by other combustible materials that can extend scarce timber resources. Dried animal dung mixed with straw and formed into bricks that burn slowly while producing steady heat represents one of the most important fuel sources available to peasant families. The preparation of these fuel bricks, involving collection, mixing, forming and drying during autumn months, requires significant labor investment but provides essential heating material that can mean survival during the harshest winter periods. Your family's winter clothing reflects the same careful planning and resource management that governs every aspect of seasonal survival. Woolen garments produced from sheep belonging to your lord's manor through the complex process of shearing, cleaning, carding, spinning, and weaving that occupies much of your wife's time throughout the year provide insulation that can maintain body heat even in unheated buildings. The layering techniques that medieval people developed for winter survival, linen undergarments that absorb moisture while providing a barrier against wool's natural scratchiness, woolen tunics and leggings that trap air for insulation, outer cloaks that repel wind and precipitation, create clothing systems that function effectively despite the lack of modern heating or weather protection. As you begin the evening ritual that will transform your cottage from its daytime configuration into the carefully organized sleeping arrangement that must shelter 8 people through another winter night, you reflect on the accumulated wisdom that makes survival possible. During these months, when darkness dominates light and every resource must be conserved for essential purposes, the approaching hours will test not only your family's physical preparations, but also the social cooperation and shared discipline that allows multiple generations to coexist peacefully in a single small room, while maintaining the alertness necessary to respond to the emergencies, fire, illness, intrusion, that pose constant threats during vulnerable winter nights. The sounds that mark the beginning of another long December evening in Brigstock Village create their own form of community solidarity. The closing of cottage doors as families retreat into their individual fortresses against winter darkness, the final calls of neighbors checking on elderly or vulnerable community members, the settling sounds of livestock in shelters that will protect valuable animals through another period when natural food sources disappear and survival depends entirely on stored resources and careful planning. As you secure your cottage's wooden door with the iron latch that represents one of your most valuable possessions, and begin the complex process of organizing 8 people for sleep in a space designed for 4, you find yourself wondering whether the preparations you have made and the resources you have accumulated will prove sufficient to carry your extended family through the months of darkness that stretch ahead, and what challenges the coming night will bring to test your knowledge of winter survival in medieval England. The first crisis of your winter night arrives not from outside threats, but from within your own household, as little Edmund's persistent coughing develops the deep, wet sound that every medieval parent learns to fear during the months when respiratory illnesses could easily transform into the kind of fever that claims children's lives despite every available remedy and care. Your wife Marjorie responds immediately to the change in your 7-year-old son's breathing, her 20 years of experience managing family health, providing the kind of instant assessment that distinguishes serious symptoms from the minor ailments that accompany winter living in poorly heated, inadequately ventilated cottages. The timing of Edmund's illness during the night hours when most healing herbs and medical assistance become unavailable reflects one of the fundamental challenges that medieval families faced during winter: survival. Medieval medical knowledge available to peasant households consisted primarily of herbal remedies, dietary adjustments, and environmental modifications that might alleviate symptoms while relying on natural healing processes to restore
Health.
but the effectiveness of these treatments depended heavily on early intervention and careful monitoring that required exactly the kind of vigilant attention that winter night conditions made most difficult to provide. Marjorie rises from your shared bed and moves carefully to the wooden chest that contains your family's medical supplies, a collection of dried herbs, preserved plant materials, and prepared remedies that represent months of gathering, processing, and storage work performed during seasons when medicinal plants remain available. The careful management of these medical resources throughout winter requires the same kind of rationing and conservation techniques that govern your food supplies, lighting materials, and fuel reserves. Each use of precious medicinal herbs must be weighed against future needs that might prove even more critical as winter progresses and your family's resistance to illness potentially weakens due to inadequate nutrition and constant cold exposure. The process of preparing herbal remedies by rushlight during winter nights requires skills that combine medical knowledge with practical expertise in working with minimal lighting and limited workspace. Marjorie kindles a single rushlight from the banked coals of your fireplace, creating just enough illumination to identify and measure the dried herbs that might ease Edmund's respiratory distress without wasting precious lighting resources on extended preparation activities. Her movements demonstrate the efficiency that comes from years of managing household medical emergencies during conditions that offer little margin for error or wasted effort. The herbal preparation she creates for Edmund combines several plants that medieval peasant medicine understood as beneficial for respiratory ailments: dried coltsfoot leaves that can reduce coughing when steeped in hot water, elderflower that may help clear blocked breathing passages, and small amounts of honey, saved from your autumn beehive harvest to soothe throat irritation while providing easily digestible nutrition for a sick child. Medieval medical practices available to peasant families emphasized working with the body's natural healing processes rather than attempting to suppress symptoms through aggressive intervention. As Marjorie prepares Edmund's herbal tea using water heated over your carefully banked fire, you find yourself calculating the various resources that this medical emergency will consume and how those expenditures might affect your family's ability to survive the remaining winter months. The fuel required to heat water, the medicinal herbs that will be used for treatment, the additional food that a sick child might need for recovery, all represent draws on carefully calculated stores that were intended to last through specific time periods based on assumptions about normal consumption rates. The social dynamics that govern your household during medical emergencies reflect the complex relationships that develop when extended families share limited space and resources during survival conditions. Your elderly mother, whose 63 years have provided extensive experience with childhood illnesses and herbal remedies, offers quiet advice about dosage and preparation techniques while remaining careful not to interfere with Marjorie's authority as the current household medical manager. Isabella, your brother's widow, assists by keeping her infant son quiet and out of the way while maintaining readiness to help with whatever tasks might contribute to Edmund's care and recovery. Your older children, John and Alice, respond to their younger brother's illness with the kind of mature responsibility that medieval life demanded from young people who understood that family survival depended on everyone's contribution to household management and crisis response. John adds wood to the fire with careful attention to maintaining steady heat for herbal preparation while conserving fuel supplies for extended use if Edmund's illness requires ongoing treatment. Alice helps arrange bedding and sleeping positions to ensure that Edmund receives the warmth and comfort that might aid his recovery, while minimizing disturbance to other family members who need rest to maintain their own health and ability to contribute to household survival. The medical crisis creates its own form of time organization that competes with the natural sleep rhythms that normally govern winter nights in peasant households. Instead of the typical pattern of first sleep, wakeful interval, and second sleep that characterizes medieval rest periods, your family settles into the vigilant watchfulness that serious illness requires, periods of light sleep interrupted by regular checking of Edmund's condition, breathing and temperature. This disrupted sleep pattern, while necessary for proper medical care, will create additional stress on your family's physical resources and immune systems during a season when maintaining health becomes crucial for survival. The sounds that accompany Edmund's illness treatment create their own nighttime atmosphere in your cottage. His coughing, gradually easing as the herbal tea begins to provide relief, mingles with the soft voices of adult family members discussing treatment options and care schedules. The crackling of your fire, maintained at higher levels than usual to provide warmth for a sick child, combines with the gentle sounds of herbal preparation and the quiet movements of family members adjusting sleeping arrangements to accommodate medical needs. From outside your cottage, the winter night carries its own collection of sounds that remind you of the broader context surrounding your family's medical emergency. The wind, picking up strength as the temperature drops, creates the kind of penetrating cold that makes effective heating even more crucial for a sick child's recovery. Occasionally, you can hear the distant sound of other cottage doors opening and closing, evidence that your family is not alone in facing nighttime medical challenges during a season when illness becomes more common and more dangerous due to environmental conditions that stress human immune systems and reduce available medical resources. The careful management of light during Edmund's medical treatment requires constant attention to conservation while ensuring adequate illumination for safe and effective herbal preparation. Each rushlight provides roughly 1 hour of usable light, meaning that extended medical care could consume lighting supplies intended to last several days under normal circumstances. Marjorie's skill in performing medical tasks with minimal lighting, measuring herbs by touch, monitoring water temperature through sound and steam observation, assessing Edmund's condition through careful listening rather than visual examination, reflect the kind of expertise that medieval women developed through necessity during seasons when resource conservation often conflicted with family medical needs. As the herbal treatment begins to provide relief and Edmund's breathing settles into more comfortable rhythms, you find yourself grateful for the accumulated knowledge and stored resources that allow your family to respond effectively to medical emergencies during conditions that offer limited options for outside assistance or professional medical intervention. But you also recognize that this single night's medical crisis has consumed resources and energy that were carefully budgeted for the entire winter period, creating new calculations and conservation requirements that will affect every aspect of your family's survival strategy during the months of darkness that still stretch ahead. The gradual return to sleep that follows successful treatment of Edmund's respiratory crisis carries its own form of cautious optimism, tempered by recognition that winter nights often bring multiple challenges that test family preparedness and resource management in unpredictable ways. The sound that signals the deepest crisis of your winter night comes not from human activity, but from the natural world that surrounds Brigstock Village, the hunting howl of wolves that medieval people understood as one of the most serious threats that could emerge. From the forest darkness during harsh winter months, when natural prey becomes scarce and human settlements begin to appear as potential food sources. The long, mournful call echoes across the frozen fields that separate your cottage from the woodlands where these predators have established their winter territory, and the responding howls from multiple directions suggest a pack of sufficient size to pose genuine danger to isolated households and their livestock. Your immediate response reflects training that every medieval peasant receives in recognizing and responding to predator threats during winter months when wolves, driven by hunger and emboldened by darkness, might approach human settlements in search of accessible prey. You rise carefully from your bed, moving to the single window of your cottage and opening the wooden shutter just enough to peer out into the night landscape that moonlight has transformed into a stark pattern of shadows and snow-covered ground that could easily conceal approaching dangers. The sight that greets your examination confirms your worst fears while providing crucial information about the nature and immediacy of the threat your family faces. In the distance, perhaps 200 yards beyond your cottage garden, you can distinguish the dark shapes of at least 4 wolves moving across the snow-covered field with the purposeful gait that suggests hunting behavior rather than simple travel through their territory. The animals appear large and healthy despite the harsh winter conditions, an indication that they have been successful in finding food sources that have maintained their strength and boldness throughout the season, when most wildlife struggles with survival challenges. Medieval understanding of wolf behavior, accumulated through generations of experience with predator management in rural communities, taught peasant families that winter wolves posed threats that extended beyond direct attacks on humans or livestock. These intelligent predators could assess human defenses, identify vulnerable points in village security, and coordinate pack hunting strategies that overwhelmed individual household protective measures. The howling that continues to echo through the winter night serves not only as communication between pack members, but also as a psychological weapon that could create panic among livestock and humans alike. Your cottage's defensive capabilities against wolf attack reflect the standard preparations that medieval peasants made for winter predator threats, while acknowledging the limitations that rural families faced when confronting organized pack hunting. The wooden door, reinforced with iron fittings that represent a significant investment in household security, provides basic protection against individual animals, but might not withstand sustained attack by multiple wolves working together to gain access to your living space. The walls, built from wattle and daub using techniques optimized for weather protection rather than defense against large predators, offer little resistance to determined animals capable of clawing and chewing through organic building materials. The process of securing your household against immediate wolf threat requires coordination among all family members while maintaining the kind of calm efficiency that prevents panic from compromising effective defensive measures. You begin by ensuring that your fire receives sufficient fuel to maintain bright flames throughout the night. Wolves, like most predators, show natural reluctance to approach well-lit areas where their night vision advantages become neutralized, and their presence becomes obvious to potential human defenders. Marjorie responds to the crisis by gathering your family's most portable valuables, the few silver coins that represent your winter emergency reserves, important documents related to your land tenure and feudal obligations, and small items that would be impossible to replace if lost during an emergency evacuation. Medieval families learn to maintain readiness for rapid departure during situations that might require abandoning homes to seek safety in more defensible locations, such as the village church or manor house that offered better protection against organized predator threats. Your older children, John and Alice, demonstrate the mature response to crisis that medieval life demanded from young people who understood that family survival might depend on their ability to follow instructions precisely while maintaining courage during dangerous situations. John secures the wooden shutters that protect your cottage's windows, ensuring that these potential entry points receive maximum reinforcement while reducing the visible light that might attract predator attention. Alice helps organize essential supplies, food, water, warm clothing, medical herbs, into bundles that could be carried quickly if circumstances required emergency evacuation. The livestock that represent crucial elements of your family's winter survival strategy create additional complications during predator threats that require immediate attention despite the personal danger involved in venturing outside your cottage's protection. Your pig, housed in a small shelter attached to your cottage's eastern wall, begins squealing with the high-pitched alarm calls that indicate awareness of nearby predator presence. The animal's distress serves both as an early warning system and as a potential attractant that could draw wolf attention directly to your household, rather than allowing the pack to continue hunting in areas farther from human settlement. The decision whether to venture outside during active predator threat to secure livestock involves calculations that balance immediate personal safety against the long-term survival considerations that govern medieval peasant life. The loss of your pig would eliminate a crucial protein source that was intended to sustain your family through the worst months of winter scarcity, creating nutritional deficiencies that could prove fatal during periods when other food sources become unavailable. But attempting to protect the animal by exposing yourself to direct predator attack could result in injury or death that would doom your entire household to starvation despite successful preservation of immediate food resources. The sounds that accompany the wolf pack's movement through the area surrounding your cottage create their own form of psychological pressure that tests your family's ability to maintain rational decision-making during crisis situations. The continued howling, now coming from multiple directions as individual animals position themselves for coordinated hunting, suggests pack behavior that has been refined through successful predation experiences and represents a level of threat that exceeds simple opportunistic hunting by desperate individual animals. From other cottages in Brigstock Village come signs that your family is not alone in recognizing and responding to the predator threat. The sound of doors slamming and wooden shutters closing with unusual force indicates that neighboring households have also identified the danger and begun implementing their own defensive measures. Occasionally, you can hear human voices calling out warnings or coordinating community response, evidence that medieval villages understood predator threats as community-wide challenges requiring collective action rather than individual defensive efforts. The medieval community response to predator threats involved informal but well-understood protocols that balanced individual household security with village-wide defensive strategies. The church bell, if rung in the specific pattern that indicated animal attack rather than fire or human raiders, would summon all able-bodied men to gather with whatever weapons they possessed for coordinated hunting action designed to drive predators away from human settlement areas. Your own equipment for such community defense consists of the long-handled wood-cutting axe that serves both practical and protective functions, plus a stout wooden staff that could provide defense against individual animal attack while lacking effectiveness against coordinated pack hunting. As the immediate crisis continues and wolf howls maintain their pressure on human nerves throughout Brigstock Village, you find yourself weighing the various options available for protecting your family while recognizing that medieval winter nights often presented survival challenges that offered no clear solutions, but rather required difficult choices between competing risks and uncertain outcomes. The decision to remain barricaded within your cottage offers maximum immediate protection while potentially sacrificing livestock that represent essential long-term survival resources, while attempting to drive away the predators involves personal risks that could prove fatal despite successful protection of valuable animals. The gradual passage of time during the crisis provides its own form of information about predator behavior and intentions while testing your family's ability to maintain defensive readiness during extended periods of high stress. As minutes pass without direct attack on human dwellings, it becomes clear that the wolf pack's primary interest focuses on easier prey sources, perhaps livestock that lack adequate protection or wild animals that can be hunted without confronting human defensive measures. This assessment provides some relief while acknowledging that predator threats during medieval winters often extended over multiple nights, as hungry animals continued searching for accessible food sources within their expanded winter hunting territories. As the sounds of wolf activity gradually move away from the immediate vicinity of your cottage, and the howling fades into the distance toward other areas of the countryside, you begin the process of assessing whether the immediate crisis has passed while maintaining readiness for renewed threat throughout the remaining hours of winter darkness. The relief that comes from surviving a serious predator encounter mingles with recognition that winter nights in medieval England often brought multiple challenges that tested family preparedness and community solidarity in ways that required constant vigilance and mutual support among rural households struggling to survive the harshest months in a landscape where human settlement remained vulnerable to the natural forces that could emerge from forest darkness without warning.